Yeah, hello. My name is Moritz. I'm a software engineer at Native Instruments since 2012. I'm working in application development. My main focus during that time has been on the machine and complete control desktop applications. And since recently, I've been heavily involved in the API and data structure design for NKS2, which we will show today.
Thanks, Moritz. So I'm Tim. I'm a product VP at Native Instruments, and I look after the hardware portfolio and the Kontakt instruments portfolio. It's a pleasure to be here to talk to everyone today, and just want to say thank you for taking the time and joining us in the room, but also online as well. So Native Control Standard, or NKS, was introduced in October 2015, in fact, at the very first one of these. And it's the connecting glue between our keyboards and software instruments, and it's delivered via a plugin called Complete Control. And NKS tackles 4 creator needs. So first is discovering sounds, and that's via a unified tag-based browser. Second is shaping sounds via handcrafted control mappings. Third is physical hands-on control and expressive performance. And then the fourth is hardware accessibility for creators with visual and other disabilities. And it launched with support from many of our friends who are here, actually. Yuhi, Spitfire Audio, Arturia, Output, Heaviosity, and many more. There's now more than 175 NKS partners and more than 1,500 NKS instruments. Starting in late 2020, we embarked on a mission to make playing software instruments feel like playing hardware instruments. And there are 2 key components that we needed in order to realize this. So first on the front end is Control Mark III S-Series keyboard that was released actually only a few weeks ago. Control Mark III, this keyboard, is built on an entirely new technology stack. And that's one that puts screen drawing, button illumination, key illumination, and more things like that onto the device itself. Now, crucially, that allows us to connect it directly to Kontakt, which is our most widely used plugin, as well as Complete Control. And it also opens the door to doing the same for other plugins in the future. Additionally, Control Mark III, we wanted to plus expression and playability for software instruments. And doing that, we introduced a polyphonic aftertouch keybed that we co-developed with our friends at Fatar. Now, coming to the back end, which is really the subject of today's talk, we have a heavily upgraded Native Control Standard, which we imaginatively call NKS2. And working with creators and partners, again, many people here I've seen over the last few days, we extended NKS in 3 major areas. First one, visual character. So if you think about the best hardware instruments, they tend to have a very strong visual identity. So NKS2 pluses the instrument banner, and that's an area that we envisage becoming far more flexible, far more dynamic in the future. And it also introduces colors for the actual controls themselves. Second is extended control or parameter mapping. So if you think about hardware instruments, they use a lot of different control types and a lot of different control styles to very quickly and characteristically communicate 2 things. One is the purpose, what this thing does, and the second is the state, what value is it set to. So NKS2 also offers this. So it tells the keyboard if a control is continuous, if it's a toggle, if it's a list, if it's what kind of list it might be, and so on and so forth. And then the keyboard will display that in an appropriate way. So very simple example, if something's a toggle, it'll display an on-off switch. Now, additionally, where a software instrument has dynamic components, so this could be something like effects that you can switch in and out or that you can reorder, the NKS2 control mappings can now be updated on the fly. And that was one of the major requests actually from a number of partners. So really happy to be able to deliver that too. And third and finally, perform and edit modes and navigation. So again, if you think about many of the most loved hardware instruments, they tend to offer an immediate playability on the surface and then deep control beneath the surface. So NKS2 offers the same thing. Performance mode gives you immediate access to all of the main controls. And edit mode gives you access to any number of deeper controls, so a lot more than we had before. And they're all organized into groups, and they can be very quickly and very directly accessed with a single click of the buttons at the top. So if you bring these two things together, here's just a couple of examples of how the S-Series Mark III keyboards display NKS2 instruments. So the top one is one of our own products, piano called Noir, and the bottom one is Urza's rather wonderful synth, one of my favorites, which is Diva.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. So it's my pleasure now to show you these features in a little more detail and also show you some examples of how you can integrate them with your product. But first, let's clarify a few basic things. So NKS2 is an extension of NKS1 rather than a replacement, right? So that means that the work that you as a partner might have put into integrating NKS1 in your product is not made obsolete by this update. In fact, the user experience on our more traditional hardware controllers will remain what it used to be. NKS2 essentially happens on our novel line of keyboard controllers, which Tim has shown, Control Mark III. And it's enabled there by connecting one of these devices to an instance of either complete control software or Kontakt. NKS2 is available for Kontakt instrument builders and for VST3 plugin developers. And I am stressing VST3 here because NKS1 has been available for both VST2 and VST3 plugins. But with this major update, we are limiting the backing technology to VST3 only. When it comes to features, we are mainly talking about two things. Parameter descriptive information. This is all about attributes attached to parameters. For example, to define parameter semantics, right? If your parameter is a toggle, then it should look and feel like a toggle on Control Mark III. There are also other data sources to define parameter semantics, like, for instance, the VST3 parameter info data structure. And the good news is we are also looking at this data to define parameter semantics for Control Mark III, but parameter descriptive information allows you to take this a little further, and you can apply these enhancements on a per parameter basis. And parameter navigation is all about how parameters are laid out on Control Mark III, and there we see a major UX overhaul compared to parameter layouts defined in NKS1. So in a nutshell, on a technical level, NKS2 is all about metadata on the instrument/effect level. That means the data actually lives in your instrument or effect and not, for example, in a preset file. Regarding parameter descriptive information, we are mainly looking at two things, which we call types and styles. And by type, we mean how a parameter behaves, right? So it can be continuous, it can be discrete, it can be unipolar or bipolar, and so on. And a style is what the parameter looks like. It can show up as a value display, as an icon display, a drop-down list. Different parameter types can be combined with different parameter styles. And we see some examples here. So on the left, you see a continuous parameter being visualized as a knob. On the left side, on the top, there's the unipolar version. And on the bottom, the bipolar version. In the middle, there's a continuous parameter visualized as a value display. And on the very right, there's a toggle being visualized as a value display. And on the bottom, a toggle which is visualized by an icon looking like a power button. For discrete parameters, there's also the value display style. And by the way, there's also a bipolar version of this one. There is the menu style, which makes the individual values of your parameter come up as strings in a list, so a user can see them next to another. And then there's the discrete waveform and filter type styles, which are very similar to the menu style, the difference being that the currently selected value of a parameter shows up as an icon as opposed to a string. Regarding parameter navigation, we distinguish between two modes, performance mode and edit mode. Performance mode on the top, and by the way, this is the actual NKS2 ready version of Ashlight. Performance mode should contain the most important, most impactful parameters of your product. it's also the first thing that a user sees of an NKS2 ready product, so kind of your landing page. And for any user who wants to go a little bit deeper and wants to do further tweaking, there's the edit button on the top right, which gets you to edit mode, where you can see ideally all parameters that your product publishes semantically separated into individual groups, the names of which you can see on the top of the screen, and you can navigate between these groups by using the hardware buttons above the screen. So much for features. Now let's look at some implementation examples, and let's start with Kontakt instruments. So one of the go-to interfaces when you're building a Kontakt instrument is the KSP scripting language. And since the most recent Kontakt versions, these NKS2 features are first-class citizen in KSP. There's a number of new control parameters and commands that you can use to implement them. For example, for parameters descriptive information, there's the control parameter NKS type and NKS style. And in this example, you can see how you can define a discrete unipolar parameter of style value. And then in the last line, there's another control parameter that we set, which is called NKS NAMM values. This is a mandatory control parameter for a discrete parameter, which tells us how many values your parameter has overall. And we need this information to, for instance, draw this indicator that you see there below the value string in proportion to the overall range. You can also redefine the individual value strings of your parameter, and you do that by declaring an array in KSP containing the individual strings. And then you iterate over the array and you assign the individual entries to a control parameter called NKS stir values. For parameter navigation, there are a couple of new commands. The first one is called set NKS nav par, and this is about placing parameters in groups. And as a first argument to this command, you pass a group index. Index 0 is reserved for addressing performance mode, and any index starting at 1 addresses a group in edit mode. Then you pass the index of your parameter. So basically you choose where to place the parameter. You can also leave gaps in between parameters if you like. And as the last argument, you pass the parameter ID. As a matter of fact, you can also place the same parameter in multiple groups. Another command is called set NKS nav name, and this is about naming groups and sections. And to explain briefly what a section is, this is this, sort of a subgroup that you can create inside of a group to add a little bit more microstructure to your parameter layout. It is a concept that was already present in NKS1, and this command essentially creates such a section by first passing the group index, and again, 0 addresses performance mode here. Then you pass the index of the parameter slot above which you want your section to begin, and it spans until the next section begins. And then the last argument is the section name. And you can use the same command to name a group, and in that case, you simply pass -1 as the parameter index. So much for KSP. Now let's also look at how you can integrate the same features in a VST3 plugin written in C++. And for that, it is important to understand how the extension of VST3 plugins works in general. This is done basically via COM interfaces. So there's a certain component in your plugin which implements a certain interface, and we on the host side can query your plugin and ask it, do you implement this interface? And if it does, then we can get a handle to this component and make function calls into it. And for NKS2, we have created a new interface called NKS metadata plugin. And this lives on the same level as, this basically, lives on the same level as your edit controller, which is basically the front end of your VST3 plugin, right? So you have to derive the class that implements the edit controller interface from this interface as well. The NKS metadata plugin interface has one single function. It's called get NKS metadata. And we call this function whenever we need to fetch the metadata. So it's a pull mechanism. We pass an object of type IB stream to this function. This is the sort of type that you use in VST3 whenever you want to wrap any sort of binary stream. And this is an opaque data type on purpose because we want this interface, which is essentially a glue layer, to remain stable while we can iterate on the data specification. So inside of this function, you do three things. First, you define your metadata. Then you serialize it to a binary blob using the message pack technology. And then finally, you attach it to the IB stream object. Regarding message pack is a technology that is already used in NKS1 to write data into preset files. And this time around, you don't need to deal with how exactly the data gets serialized to message pack because the NKS2 SDK comes with a library, a C++ library, that will do this for you. And we will see what you can do with this library now. And the library is called NKS metadata. It contains a couple of data structures that allow you to define the metadata. And it also gives you an entry point to write the metadata into serialize the metadata to binary data. And you do this by passing the metadata, and in return, you get a byte vector and a result code. If your result code indicates that something went wrong, then you probably want to do some error handling, which we skip on this slide. But if everything went fine, then the next thing you do is you attach the binary data to the IB stream object, which, as you can see, is a simple one-liner. And this is the sort of boilerplate code that would probably look the same in every plugin. What will look different is the definition of the metadata itself. And for that, there is an overarching object called metadata. So that's the overarching type, right? And as you would expect, this has two data members, one of them being called parameter descriptive info, the other one being called parameter navigation. Parameter descriptive info essentially is a map. And the keys in that map basically represent the IDs of the parameters, right? So it's an unsigned integer type. And what is important is that these IDs are actually equivalent with the IDs representing the same parameters in VST3. So this is how we can make the connection. And then the value type is a type that we call attributes. And this essentially encapsulates the type, the style, the value count, and the display values. So for a discrete parameter, you could construct the attributes like this. You could either pass the value count or pass the display values from which we can then infer the value count. And for a continuous parameter, you can simply pass the type and the style, and you're good. Regarding parameter navigation, there's again an encapsulating object, and this is called parameter navigation. And then inside, there's one data member being called performance mode, and a second data member representing edit mode being called groups. Performance mode essentially is a std vector of sections, and each section is composed by a string representing the name, and then another vector representing the parameters, so the parameter placements to be precise. And each of these parameter placements is a parameter ID, and optionally, you can also specify a display name that will come up on the hardware display instead of the name that you might have specified via the plugin interface. And finally, for edit mode, there is a vector of a type called group. And each group, again, is composed of a name and also a vector of sections. And yeah, you can create groups individually and then pushing them back onto the groups vector one after another, or you can define them all in place, whatever programming style you prefer. So this basically concludes the code examples. So yeah, thank you for listening. And yeah, if you have any questions, you can visit us at the Native Instruments table upstairs. We also have an email address for third-party developers, which you can write to if you have any sort of feedback, questions, or you might be stuck in your NKS implementation and need support from us. So this is how you can reach us. And then I think we have 7 minutes now for questions. Yeah.
It's roughly 7 minutes for questions. So if people can try and keep their questions short. If I can just start with one while we get ready for online. VST3 I see there. How about the other formats, and particularly clap? It looks like a file format, so you know it's a blob that needs to get thrown over a fence at some point. So can we expect to see some of those other formats, audio units, AAX, clap, etc.?
Yeah, so from the technical side, so NKS essentially is a data specification, right? And there is this glue layer, which I have shown, which kind of attaches the data specification to the plugin interface. In theory, it is possible to, do this on any other sort of plugin interface which supports a similar way of extending the plugin. So in theory, like from a technical perspective, this is possible.
Following on from that a little bit, so Kontakt will support this in any format, or only VST3 Kontakt is the first half of the question. The other is, will a VST3 wrapped in a different plugin format be able to communicate?
So yes and yes. Yeah, so Kontakt directly, this might, I think it's on. Anyway, Kontakt directly, yes, that will work, any format. It doesn't matter. Not clap, actually. Clap has not been implemented, but VST3, AU, AAX. And essentially the VST3 you put inside Complete Control plugin, which again can be an AU, a VST3, or AAX, and it will all work within that. So it's more about when we extend to other plugins, what makes the most sense. But yeah, Kontakt will work in all of them.
Thank you so much for your talk. I'm always excited to see work where there's metadata augmenting control data to create a user interface natively. What I'm wondering, having followed the evolution of 2.0 over the time, MIDI 2.0, sorry. I know that you obviously don't use it now, but in the near to distant future, somewhere, do you see that you would adopt MIDI 2.0? Do you think that there's features missing that need to be added to MIDI 2.0 to, eventually in, I don't know how many years' time, replace this work? I'd be very curious on your take on that.
Yeah, I mean, MIDI 2.0 is really exciting. The keyboard is actually all prepared, supports MIDI 2. It's just that there aren't so many features there yet. But I think MIDI 2, I mean, we sit on the MIDI Association and are involved in that too. So it's something that I think is very exciting. What I imagine might happen is MIDI 2.0 will remain on a sort of slightly more generic level, but still allow something much, much better than what we do if we're not talking to Kontakt or Complete Control today, And maybe this will be able to take it further still. But in an ideal world, it'll all end up in MIDI 2.0, right? So let's see how that develops. And of course, we want to contribute to that too. But it's not, we don't see it as an either or by any means. It's really part of the same mission, right, in the end.
Yeah, thank you for a great talk. Just wondering, could other companies like DAWs and such use NKS to provide like unified interfaces for plugins and such?
So there's nothing there yet, but that's a conversation that we'd really love to have. So I think potentially yes. You know, the keyboard integrates to a certain level, but just to allow it to speak to the plugins, basic transport, that kind of stuff right now. But yes, absolutely. That's something that I think is quite an interesting approach. You know, do you do it on a per plugin level? Do you on a DAW level? But I think events like this are great for those kinds of conversations.
And just following up on that, do you see it remaining exclusive to NI hardware and the other companies within the NI group, or you know, third-party controller vendors, that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's not impossible that we would open that up. You know, if it makes sense in both directions, but also if people want to adopt what we're doing, because you know, Control Mark 3, it's basically an embedded device. In the end, so it has certain specs and so on, the screen sizes. But it's like, I mean, I think the main message you're hearing with a lot of the answers to these questions, which are great questions, is how open we want to have conversations. We want it to be, probably more open than it has been in the past, and that's partly was one of the sort of premises of why we did it the way we did it this time around, which obviously Moritz can talk about in more detail. But
brilliant, thanks. One more here.
Hi, thank you very much. There seems to be an issue between the Juice VST3 wrapper and NKS2, which basically makes it impossible at the moment to use NKS2. So do you have any feedback about this, please?
Moritz can talk about this.
That's a very good question. Yes, you are right. Yeah. That's a very good question. Yes, you are right. There is this issue. Unfortunately, it has taken a little bit of time until this issue reached us. So we are only aware of this since a few weeks. And I'm actually pretty confident that we can fix this issue. We are just looking at it actually at the moment. And I think if I recall correctly, then it has to do with the sequence of initializing certain components in the plugin, and we are querying the interfaces too early, which is something that we could certainly fix on our side. And if that's the case, then we will hopefully ship this fix very soon. So it's a very good call out. Because obviously, yeah, so we have a number of partners using Juice, and we want to give the same level of support to them that we do to.
Well, thank you very much. That's all we've got time for today. But if you have other questions, there's the email there. So please give it up for Moritz and Tim. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.